Welcome to the lecture for Psych 350. We're talking about research relevant to the neo-Freudian psychoanalytic theories. And we'll talk about three things. Talk about some of the stuff that's been found regarding coping with anxiety, talk about a psychoanalytic view of aggression, and then talk about attachment style. So, starting off talking about coping with anxiety. First, it's kind of just a quick review Freud's concept of anxiety. I talk about three different types of anxiety. Right? Reality anxiety, which is your expectable anxiety, expectable anxious reaction to stressful life events. And you're aware of why you're feeling anxious and that you are feeling anxious. So if you get mugged and you are afraid, that's reality anxiety, which Freud wasn't too interested in that, but kind of named it. I also talk about neurotic anxiety, right, which occurs whenever id impulses begin to get too close to the surface, and the ego is threatened and fears destruction, and so it defends itself with defense mechanisms. And then there's moral anxiety, which comes not from the ego, but the superego, whenever id impulses run counter to the strict rules of the superego. So that's how Freud talked about anxiety, and those ideas influenced the neo-Freudians. But then they kind of went further and said, okay, well, regardless of the type of anxiety that people experience, it's generally experienced as something unpleasant, and so people find ways to reduce it, right? And Freud talked about unconscious ways of coping, and the neo-Freudians elaborated on those defense mechanisms. But the neo-Freudians went beyond that and identified these other coping strategies that included conscious efforts to reduce anxiety. And these conscious efforts, broadly termed, are coping strategies or coping mechanisms. Although arguably you could also say that defense mechanisms are also a subtype of coping strategies. So as usual with psychoanalytic, psychodynamic theorists, the terms get a little bit fuzzy. But in terms of why this is relevant to personality, it seems that people, the data indicates that people tend to have a preferred strategy or preferred set of strategies for dealing with anxiety. Right? So people have a certain coping style. So coping style seems to be one aspect of personality. Right? A typical way of dealing with the world, which is what personality is. And coping style is a typical way of dealing with anxiety, so with one aspect of the world. Some of the interesting research looking at gender differences found that women report using more coping strategies overall than men. And then a meta-analysis, it's not mentioned in your book, by Tamrez, Janicki, and Hagelson in 2002, indicated that women tend to use strategies associated with verbal expression more than men. But they noted that gender differences in the use of coping strategies differed across types of stressors. So getting fired, losing a loved one, getting a new job, these different types of stressors, the degree to which men and women differ and the ways they differ might change to some degree. But overall, women tended to use strategies in terms of talking about the problem more so than did men. Is one of the consistent findings across studies. So in terms of how people can be different in their coping style, one way of looking at it is along this continuum of repression and sensitization. With repression, you're familiar with that term from Freud, obviously, trying to push things down. But this is an unconscious repression, but kind of conscious repression, where you try not to think about the problem. So there's that spot on your skin, like, oh, that looks worrisome, but no, I'll think about it later. Don't think about it. Think about something else. Let's go. I'm gonna go watch the basketball game. Right. So you distract yourself and try not to think about the thing that's causing your anxiety. And at the other end of the spectrum, and you don't have to be at one end or the other. You can anywhere on the continuum, but think of it as this continuum spectrum. At the other end would be people who are high in sensitization. People that use strategies. where they're trying to think about it and gathering as much information about the stressful event as possible. So not thinking about the anxiety-provoking event, or I'm going to think about it a lot and figure out kind of what's going on. So I see the spot and I'm going to Google the heck out of the spot on my skin. What could it mean? And gather information. So that's one way of thinking about differences, individual differences in coping style. Another way that has substantial empirical support is by looking at the focus of one's efforts to address the anxiety, and kind of where your energy goes in terms of dealing with the anxiety. One way to focus would be problem focused, and this is whenever you the things you do to address the problem thought to cause the anxiety. So going to the doctor, if you have financial worries, creating a budget. So problem-focused strategies, if you think about that continuum we just talked about, would be on the sensitization end of the continuum. Right? So doing things to fix the problem. So once I fix the problem, the anxiety will go away. Right? Another type of strategy would be emotion-focused. So rather than trying to fix the problem, what can I do to make myself feel better? How can I address the feelings caused by the problem without necessarily changing the problem? For example, a cognitive strategy would be reframing. So something bad happens and trying to find the good in it. Well, my car was totaled, but now I will save lots of money on gas. There's always an upside. I feel better now. So finding some way to make yourself feel better. Writing in your diary, talking with your friends about your feelings. So addressing those the emotions brought on by the problem. So dealing with the anxiety, but not necessarily the anxiety evoking event. And the third, which you might term out of focus, or as the book talks about it, avoidance strategies, trying to ignore or suppress the emotions. So this would be on the repression end of the continuum we talked about before. So this is getting high, hanging out with your friends to distract yourself, doing anything not to think about and not to feel the anxiety caused by the problem. And notice, I kind of mentioned hanging out with your friends. So hanging out with your friends could be a problem-focused strategy, emotion-focused, or an avoidance, depending on how you're doing it and why you're doing it. If you're hanging out with your friends to distract yourself, that's an avoidance strategy. If you're hanging out with your friends to talk about how you're feeling in order to feel better, that's an emotion-focused strategy. If you're hanging out with your friends to brainstorm for solutions to the problem, now it's a problem-focused strategy. So it's not always so clear-cut that, this one thing falls neatly here or here. It has to do with, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get away from your feelings? Are you trying to have good feelings, not just get away from negative feelings? Or are you trying to solve the problem? So are we good at coping? The coping strategies employed by people, are they effective in reducing anxiety? In general, yes. People who use some coping strategy generally experience less anxiety than individuals who aren't able to engage in any systematic coping strategies. And one thing that which we found is that active coping strategies, which might also be termed problem-focused, typically are more successful than avoidant coping strategies. But there also might be some emotion-focused strategies that would fall under the active category. So if we think of active avoidant being similar to the repression sensitization continuum, so people who are on that sensitization end, trying to do something about the problem, or just trying to do something about the problem or about your feelings, tends to be better. But one thing that I'd like for you to think about is, if you were doing a study to look at what type of coping mechanism was more effective than another, what would the dependent variable be? In one of the studies that your book mentions, it talks about medical students, and their DV was physical health. So, and the idea being, if you use these active coping strategies, they reported less health concerns than people who used avoidant coping strategies. So health concerns, or going to the doctor, was their index of coping effectiveness. So other than health concerns, can't use that one, what else might you use? What would be good evidence that one coping style was better than another? What would you measure? Okay, one more thing on kind of the active avoidant. Avoidance may be effective in the short term in terms of it works to reduce anxiety in the short term, but generally long term not effective and may lead to more problems, because some problems that we avoid get worse if you avoid them, like a spot on your skin. If it's a small melanoma, it may be a minor problem if you have surgery now, but if you wait a couple of months, it could invade the nerve and then spread to other tissue, and then you're dead, which is a larger problem than the small spot on your skin. That being said, for any of you who are thinking about going into the mental health field, some advice to future therapists. One thing I always tell the grad students when working with clients who are using maybe some avoidant coping strategies to deal with stressors, don't take those away from people until you've taught them or you've explored with them whether or not they have other coping strategies. Because again, some coping is better than no coping. If you take away their avoidance and just, okay, here, deal with the problem, it's here, you can't avoid it, and they have no other skills, then some really bad things could happen. If they're overwhelmed with anxiety, then you have the kind of breakdown. And in psychodynamic terms, the ego is overwhelmed and goes into retreat, and they can no longer function as individuals. So avoidant is bad, but don't take it away and tell people until you know that somebody has some other coping strategies. Okay. What about, so we said active is better than avoidant, and then active can be problem or emotion focused. But what about specifically the comparison of problem focused or emotion focused? Which is more effective? Well, it depends. It depends on if you can do anything about the problem. If you can do something about the problem, then generally problem focus seems to be more effective with the way that it's been measured. But sometimes you can't fix the problem, right? If somebody loses a child, you can't fix that. Having another child won't fix the loss of the first one. So you have to be able to use some emotion-focused coping. You have to deal with the emotions, because you can't bring that person back from the dead. So depends on the situation which one is better. And given that we all will encounter a variety of situations, the healthiest people, the most well-adjusted people, are those that have good coping flexibility, right? Who have the ability to switch between strategies, so they don't have this kind of rigid aspect of the personality where they can only cope one way, which is something we may see later that seems to be a truism of individuals in terms of healthy functioning. Flexibility and personality in general seems to be an important thing. If we look at going off from personality into psychopathology, and we look at personality disorders, one of the key aspects of disordered personalities, a personality that gets you a DSM-4 diagnosis, is that it's rigid, that it's inflexible, that you can't, you are this way and you can't change when the situation demands that you change. So, to some degree, personality flexibility seems to be a good thing in our world. Another study that's not mentioned directly in your book, Fresco, Williams, and Nugent, 2006, found that coping flexibility played an important role in predicting anxious and depressive symptoms in adults. So there's kind of one more piece of evidence that this kind of coping flexibility, being able to cope in more than one way, seems to be a good thing. People that don't have the ability may experience higher levels of anxiety and depression. Okay, now let's switch from anxiety to aggression. In the psychoanalytic view of aggression, largely is predicated on Freud's early conceptualization, right, where he said that aggression came from frustration of the libidinal impulses. He later changed it, because at first he just had libido. It was all about sex, and the only reason you were aggressive is because you couldn't get the sex, you couldn't get the pleasure. Something was getting in the way of you getting your pleasure. Later he added the thanatos, and that, okay, in addition to wanting pleasure, we also have this destructive impulse. But his first conceptualization is what some of the Neo-Freudians built upon when formulating the frustration-aggression hypothesis. The frustration-aggression hypothesis is just that all acts of aggression are preceded by frustration. So the frustration causes the aggression. And that any experience of frustration will inevitably lead to acts of aggression, although not always in a recognizable form. So that was the original frustration aggression hypothesis, and then it was modified to some degree because they found that oftentimes aggression was present even when there wasn't clear frustration and it wasn't clear that displacement was going on. And so one thing that they found through a series of other studies was that it seemed to be the unpleasantness of a situation influenced likelihood of aggression. So high temperatures, loud noises, but so do our cognitive interpretations of the event. So you're trying to walk to the front of the class and you trip over somebody's foot. So your goal of reaching the front of the class has now been frustrated. So on just the old school frustration aggression hypothesis, you will now hit the person, or you will enact some act of aggression because you've been frustrated in your attempt and you're frustrated by that person. But what we know now is that, well, it depends on what you think happened. Do you think they tried to trip you, or do you think it was an accident? And depending on your attribution, you will be more or less likely to be aggressive. So if you make this attribution, yeah, they tried to trip me, more likely to hit them. If not, then you won't. Which is interesting because we find that in kids, especially boys, they're more likely to make the attribution that somebody tried to hurt them whenever it's not clear. Given any kind of ambiguous situation, they're more likely to see aggressive, provoking cues than non-aggressive kids. So, so frustration matters, but so too does how we interpret events and also other stimuli that are going in, just making us uncomfortable and unhappy and wanting the unpleasantness to go away. Okay, so you remember talking about displacement before when we talked about the defense mechanism, hopefully, and it applies here to aggression. There's lots of evidence that people who are subjected to negative experiences, either frustration or just any kind of unpleasant experience, they display heightened aggression toward individuals or objects that were unrelated to the negative experience. So again, you know, your car breaks down, and you yell at your students, and your students didn't fix your car, didn't break your car, but there is that correlation where this negative experience precedes aggression, when there's no way that the target of the aggression was in any way related to the original negative experience. And that's what displacement is all about. Right? And so sometimes it's people who are totally innocent, totally unrelated. Sometimes it's a little bit of both, and they came up with this term triggered displaced aggression. Whenever this is whenever somebody ticks you off a little bit, but you already had some tension built up from earlier unpleasant experiences, earlier frustration, and so you unload all of it on this person who slighted you in some small way, and you respond with too much aggression or more aggression than you would have responded had you not had this other built-up tension. So a little bit of real aggression and a little bit of displaced aggression together is your triggered displaced aggression. Okay. In terms of displacement and triggered displaced aggression, another thing I'd like for you to kind of think about, your book talks about sometimes you can't direct your aggression at its true target, because the true target, the person who pissed you off, is someone with power over you. For example, your boss. What other situations might lead to displacement? When else might you experience negative events and you can't direct your aggressive impulses toward the target, and so you have to do it to somebody else other than somebody who you're afraid of or who can fire you? So think about that. Another aspect of the hypothesis, frustration aggression hypothesis, is this idea of catharsis, the idea that the tension that comes from the frustration or unpleasant situation will disperse, will go away once given vent via aggression. Right? So you experience catharsis. It's cathartic to aggress, and you feel better. And the tension's gone, and you no longer need to be aggressive. And there are data that suggest there's a physiological change following aggression, where you have this kind of drop in physiological markers of arousal. So really aroused, hit something, and the arousal tends to come down. So that would support this aspect of the theory. but then the actual reduction in aggression and reduction in aggressive behavior, less support for that. Actually, it seems to be more aggression once aggression starts. So yelling at somebody, although we may experience this physiological breakdown, we don't then go, oh, I feel so much better. Hey, you want to get some ice cream? We still feel angry, and we still may continue to act angry and act aggressive toward them and toward other things around us. It doesn't just go away. And why might that be? Well, there's a couple of explanations. We'll talk about two of them. One would be the disinhibition hypothesis. The idea that we have this kind of rule against violence, and think about that being the superego saying, no, don't, that violence is bad, don't do it. And even the ego saying, if you hit this person, you will get in trouble. So we have kind of this retaining wall holding back these impulses that want to be aggressive. And once we break that wall, we break the dam, there's this flood of aggression that will continue to flow. Which, to kind of give you an analogy, think about people that are on a diet, people who have restrictive eating. So they reduce their caloric intake and say, okay, no sweets whatsoever, I'm not going to eat any sweets. And so you end up eating less than what your body wants, and so you have this buildup of desire for calories and often carbohydrates. You say, well, maybe I'll just have one little chip. One little chip isn't going to hurt me, not that bad. And you have one little chip, and then and then the bag of chips is gone, right? So some of us have had that experience where once you give in, you've been inhibiting an impulse, and once you give in a little bit, it's hard to stem the tide until all of the impulse has been satisfied. And it may take a while, and your behavior may continue beyond maybe what seems justified, given whatever frustrated you in terms of violence. So it could be some aspect of disinhibition. Might also be explained by a conditioning process. Remember, think about operant conditioning, where if aggression reduces tension, so then aggression is negatively reinforced. Right? We remove a negative thing by exhibiting a behavior, and by removing the negative thing, that's pleasant for the tension to go away. Therefore, the removal of the tension is rewarding. So aggression is rewarded, and anything that's rewarded is more likely to be repeated. So if it feels good to yell and hit a little bit, well, it'll probably feel even better to yell and hit more. Right? By and large, the whole idea of catharsis not supported by research, and even the opposite seems to happen. Nonetheless, the idea continues to persist, and some counselors still tell children to hit a doll or bang some Play-Doh, whatever they do. But that is not at all supported by research. Okay, the last thing we'll talk about, attachment style. One of my personal favorite aspects of psychodynamic theory, and kind of what came out of that theory. And it started arguably with the object relations theory. So Winnicott, Klein, Kohut, a couple of people that expanded upon Freud's ideas about the importance of early experiences. Right? But instead of focusing just on the individual, as Freud did, right? Freud saying, okay, it's all about me getting my pleasure, right? Orally, anally, generally, wherever I'm at in the stages. But the object relations looked at the individual in the context of important relationships, especially with caregivers and especially with mom. And they proposed the idea that infants develop unconscious internal images, understandings, i.e. objects, that represent their experiences with others. Right? And note here that Jung would have argued that we're actually born with the templates for these objects, right? And those templates would be archetypes. So you don't have to form the mother object from scratch. We're all born with a template for the mother object, which we then maybe refine based on experience. But the object relations theory says, okay, you form this object, this idea, this mental representation, which in kind of modern parlance for cognitive psychologists would say a schema, right? You develop this schema of the mother, which is then used to help guide our understanding of experiences with others, right? Which is what we understand schema to be today. Okay. And then Bowlby expanded on this with his development of attachment theory. Right? And Bowlby wrote a lot of things, but a couple things. He proposed that we're born with tendencies to establish an attachment with caregivers, and that caregivers also have inborn tendencies to respond to what infants do. So, in simple language, babies are programmed to cry and coo, and adults are programmed to not like the sound of crying and to like the sound of cooing. Right? So the idea that we're born, and maybe via evolution, maybe via genetics, but somehow we're born with these tendencies. You don't have to teach a baby to cry. You don't have to teach an adult to not like the sound of crying. Even if you've never had a child, if you hear a baby crying on an airplane, like, oh, gee, would somebody shut that thing up? And even if it's no louder than the salesman 3 seats over talking on his cell phone, you'll find that baby's cry more anxiety-provoking. And there seems to be something biological about that, which suggests possibly an inborn tendency. Which again, Jung would argue has to do with archetypes. But anyway, so we're born with these tendencies, and we want to form attachments. We're social creatures by nature, and we want to seek out a security from caregivers, and caregivers want to respond in ways that make us feel secure and reduce their own anxiety. So we're born with the tendencies, but it doesn't always go the right way. Right? But there are these interactions that occur because of those inborn tendencies. And the interactions that occur as the infant's seeking to form an attachment and reduce its anxiety, or generally negative affect, based on those interactions, the child forms an internal working model. So internal working model, again, another word for that might be schema. An internal working model that's used to organize information about others, about themselves, and about the world. And they develop a sense of security or insecurity. And so if they develop a sense of security, so if they're whenever they're anxious and they seek out the caregiver, if their needs are consistently met, then they'll develop a sense of security where they'll see themselves as good and worthwhile. They'll see others as safe and trustworthy, and the world as generally a safe place. If, however, the caregiver doesn't respond consistently, either doesn't respond at all or is inconsistent, then they'll develop this internal working model of themselves as being unworthy and bad, others as being untrustworthy, and the world as being a dangerous place. So which Neo-Freudian that we talked about in the last chapter does this most remind you of? Hopefully, you said, well, Erik Erikson, of course, right? Think about the first stage of his psychosocial model of development, trust versus mistrust. So infants establish the sense of trust or mistrust, security or insecurity. There's a clear parallel there between theorists. So Bowlby proposes theory, several volumes written on attachment, and then Mary Ainsworth expanded on this with research. So Bowlby, mostly theory. Ainsworth did some theory stuff, but also did a heck of a lot of stuff in the lab. And most well known for the strange situation task, right, where she'd have moms come in with the baby, and they would observe them together, and then they'd have the mom leave the baby in a room with an experimenter. Mom would leave the room, and there'd be some strange object in the room, something that the kid hadn't seen before, toys or things that the kid wasn't familiar with. And they say, okay, what happens when the kid's left alone, and then mom comes back? What happens when mom comes back? Right, that's the strange situation task. And based on their observations, they found that these mother-child dyads tended to fall into one of three categories based on their attachment style. And people forget that Ainsworth stuff, the attachment style, is a description of the mother-child dyad. It's a description of two people's interacting behavior, not just the kids. I think, oh, well, the kid has this style. Well, really, it was about the mother and the kid. And there's research that suggests that attachment styles can differ across caregivers. So you may have one attachment style with mom, another one with dad, and then if grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle are also involved, you may have a different attachment style with them. Okay. But it was kind of the mother-child dyad, and they found these three different typical patterns. One, this kind of secure pattern, where the mothers tended to be attentive whenever their child was upset and met their needs consistently. So whenever they left the room, the kid cried a little bit, because they liked their mom, but then they were okay. The idea being that, again, brought from the object relations theory, that they had a healthy object, internalized object of the mother, and even when she was gone, they still had the internalized object and knew that she was not gone forever. She wasn't destroyed because she was out of sight. And these kids were more confident, able to kind of explore this strange environment and play with the toys. And then when mom came back, they're happy to see her and give her a hug. And then there's the anxious ambivalent dyads. That's where mom is unresponsive, fairly unpredictable. Sometimes responds, sometimes doesn't. And then the kid, whenever mom leaves, is inconsolable. Other adults can't console the child. And the kid's generally afraid to explore the strange environment. And then when mom comes back, there might be some more crying and maybe even some anger, hitting mom when she comes back. And the third type being the avoidant. Again, mom being generally unresponsive, completely not unpredictably unresponsive, just really unresponsive. And these kids, when mom leaves, they don't really care. They just sit there, not interested in exploring stuff. And when she comes back, they don't really care about that either. So these attachment styles, according to Ainsworth and Bowlby, you say, well, what does it mean to be an attachment style? Is this how you are as a person all the time? No, it has to do with specifically when your sense of relational security is threatened. How do you deal with it? That's your attachment style. So what's the nucleus of it? Do you seek out intimacy? Do you lash out with anger? Do you avoid? What do you do whenever you're not sure about that connection with some other person, when you're unsure about a relationship? So Ainsworth developed this kind of three category model of different attachment styles. More recent research has suggested a four category model based on two dimensions. One dimension being that fear of abandonment. So high anxiety versus low anxiety. So really worried that the person that you're in a relationship, that mom or romantic partner, if we're thinking about adults, is not going to be there for me, and if I don't hold on close, they're out the door. Or low anxiety, no, they're not going anywhere, or I don't care if they go anywhere. I'm not anxious about them abandoning me. And then the other continuum being a fear of intimacy, which on this chart is high avoidance, where you have a high fear of intimacy, and low avoidance, where you seek out intimacy. And based on where you fall on these two dimensions, you can result in one of four quadrants, and each quadrant is given a categorical name. With low avoidance, low anxiety being secure. So seeking out intimacy and not being real afraid they're going to leave you. That's secure attachment. That kind of makes sense. And then if you are low anxiety but high avoidance, so you avoid personal relationships, but you aren't worried people are going to abandon you, that would be the dismissive or avoidant type, where it's like, oh, well, screw people, I'm not going to worry about it. Which arguably they might be high anxiety in terms of abandonment if they're with people, but they prevent the anxiety by being so high in avoidance. But then the other people that unfortunately are high in avoidance, but also high in anxiety. So those people that are typically high in the avoidance of intimacy, but still put themselves in relationships and are very afraid of being abandoned. And then we also, the fourth one would be the preoccupied, where you're high in anxiety but low in avoidance. So you really want to be in relationships and you seek out a lot of them, but you're always worried about being abandoned. So these people that usually have lots and lots of short-term relationships, very kind of clingy and emotionally needy. And so much afraid that people are going to abandon them that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, if you always ask somebody, "Are you going to leave me? Are you going to leave me?" and the person begins to wonder themselves, "Well, why am I still with them? If they think I should, if I'm going to leave them, maybe I should leave them. Maybe there's something wrong with them." Right? So, which model is better, the 3 category or the 4 category? They both have their merits, but it seems most research today is leaning towards supporting this 4 category model. It seems to capture current data better than a three-category model. It tends to tell us more about people. So what about romantic relationships? So we talk mostly about this kind of mother-child stuff, right? Well, a person's characteristic way of dealing with threats to relationship security, which that's what attachment style is. So attachment style is related to relationship success and satisfaction. So not that surprising, right? So how you deal with the possibility of not being of being in a relationship about this intimacy and abandonment, the way you deal with that is predictive of how happy you are in a relationship and how likely you are to continue to be in a relationship. So as you're reading this and you're reading the research that talks about relationship satisfaction, relationship success, one thing that I'd like for you to ask yourself is, if you were doing the research, how would you define relationship success? You know, if you say, oh, well, people that are securely attached have more successful relationships. Well, what do they mean by successful relationships? Does that mean still together, still married, living in the same house? Does that make sense to you as a good measure of relationship success? Or if not, what might be a better measure of a successful relationship? Okay, so not a big surprise that attachment style is related to relationship outcomes. But what most people really want to know is if those early experiences with mom and dad are related to how you are with your partner. So if early attachment style and kind of later or current adult attachment style, romantic attachment style, are they related? Is attachment style stable? And generally, yes. There does seem to be a high level of stability, but it's not rigidly stable. It is subject to change. And the book makes it sound like Bowlby would be shocked that some people, up to 30% in one study, experience a change in attachment style. But if you read Bowlby's work, he wouldn't be surprised at all. Remember that his definition, he's talked about this internal working model. And a working model means a model that is a work in progress. A model, in the internal model, responds to environmental inputs. Right? And it's not in the early environmental inputs are hugely important, but environmental inputs don't stop. Relationships don't stop after infancy. So your base is set when you're a child, but things can change from other relationships. So it's not surprising that some longitudinal studies have found that when kids who have a secure attachment, if their parents divorce, some of those kids become less secure in their attachment styles. And then other kids who are initially insecure, if they experience long-term stable relationships after their initial negative experiences, they become more secure. So your attachment style does respond to, it seems, relationship experiences, which is one of the cornerstones of psychotherapy. Psychotherapy being, for some people, an opportunity to experience a healthy relationship and develop a different sense of yourself, others, and the world. That's basically what it's about. Okay, so we've talked about coping anxiety, aggression, and attachment style, and there's scads more research from the neo-Freudians that we could talk about, especially the birth order stuff we barely touched on. But kind of like Freud, some support, but not unequivocal support. So some ideas supported, some not so much. So there is no easy answer in terms of, well, are they empirically supported or not? Well, it depends on what you're talking about. You always have to look more closely. Okay, that's it for now. Take care.